Let's turn now to get the view of Lord Richard Dannatt, crossbench peer and former head of the British Army, to really try and understand what this means in practice. A very good afternoon from us.
Hello, good afternoon to you.
Right, could you talk us through this in terms that we are really going to understand about what a 2.5% of GDP by 2030 commitment actually looks like?
Well, the first thing is that it's good news that we've got a hardened promise from the current Prime Minister of raising our defence spending from about 2.2% to 2.5% by the end of the decade. Now, that's actually still quite a long way away. That's 5 or 6 years away. But listening carefully to what he was saying, it does seem that there are significant amounts of new money, additional money. It's difficult to actually quantify it, but we're talking about between 10 and 20 billion pounds a year extra every year between now and 2030. And that is good news from the defence budget's point of view. Whether 2.5% by 2030 is enough, I'm afraid still remains as an open question. And there are a number of us, of which I'm one, who have been arguing that actually getting to 3% would be a more appropriate figure given the uncertainty in the world at the present moment, and particularly given the continued aggression by Russia into Ukraine. But to give current Prime Minister his due, he has pledged more money year on year while it's needed for Ukraine. That's important. He's pledged to put our industry, our defence industry, on a war footing. Now, the important thing about that is that hitherto, particularly ammunition manufacturers, have been hesitant to gear up their production lines because they haven't been confident that there would be sufficient funds coming forth from the government. Well, the Prime Minister today has pledged that that will be the case, so they can up their production of ammunition. And then the third priority he pointed to, as far as I can recall, is innovation and improving the quality of the weapons available across the three armed services. So I think it's fair to say these are considerable steps in the right direction. But is he going far enough? Is he going fast enough? I'm afraid that's where the debate will be in the future.
Yeah. So if we can just quantify this, it would be an extra £70 billion on core defence spending over 6 years. What does that actually buy? I mean, is it possible to give examples of what that means?
Well, you can look right across the board at various projects. Let's take the carrier strike programme. We know that we currently have not bought the number of F-35 aircraft that we have pledged and always said previously that we wanted to buy to fly off our aircraft carriers to make them credible. So as soon as additional money is available, then we can put an additional order in for F-35 aircraft. By the same token, there are something like 20 new ships for the Royal Navy on the drawing board at the present moment. Again, some of these are just on the drawing board and not funded. But so if there are additional funds coming forward, it'll mean that some of that shipbuilding can be accelerated. Now, all these things, of course, are good for British jobs. Then thirdly, and this, of course, is where I'm parochially rather more interested in, the Army has got considerable equipment spending plans, particularly for air defence and for field artillery, the sort of artillery that the Ukrainians have been using a lot of in Ukraine in the last couple of years. Now, only 20% of the programs that the Army wants to see funded are currently out to contract. So 80% of Army uplift contracts need to be funded. Now, having talked in the last little while to one or two contacts in the Ministry of Defence, there is a concern that, as ever in the Ministry of Defence, trying to find enough money to balance the books in the next 12 months is a big problem for them. So they're going to look to see some of this money coming forward early to balance the books for the coming year. And the other thing to say, which is not welcome news, is there is a black hole, in particular the defence equipment budget, of somewhere between 15 and 20 billion pounds. So if this extra money is coming forward, there's going to be a negative use of some of that, and that is to fill in the black hole between aspiration and what is funded.
Right, so that's the result, isn't it, of the cross-party Public Accounts Committee? So that said
Yes.
in March that the gap between the MOD budget and the cost of
And of
military
course,
capabilities might be £29 billion. So that
could
is
well
that's paying off the overdraft, isn't it, before you can actually make any new
it is.
purchases? Yep.
But
I'm
before anybody gets sort of party political about it, and I'm a crossbencher, so I'm not going to. It's worth remembering that in 2010, when David Cameron's government came in, there was around a 40 billion black hole in the defence budget. So this isn't new. This is over aspiration, over ambition in the Ministry of Defence, not matching the amount of funding that's available. It's a perennial problem, and it does need to be gripped.
Lord Dannatt, thank you very much indeed for your time. We appreciate that this afternoon. That is Lord Richard Dannatt, crossbench peer, as he said, former head of the British Army.
Joining me now is Jamie Shea. He's the former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good to be back with you.
Yes, you're a very well-known name. You were ubiquitous a few years ago when you were speaking for NATO, so it's good to speak to you. I mean, the £500 million, I've described it as a record amount of military aid to Ukraine. I mean, Britain has no shame in terms of the amount of money it has given to Ukraine, but obviously it's a drop in the ocean compared to the $60 billion that the Americans have just pledged.
Well, yes, you're right. And the EU, of course, also voted 50 billion euros just a couple of weeks back. But the UK matters. Number one, the UK was one of the first to get into the game under the Prime Ministership of Boris Johnson, of course, in assisting Ukraine, the first to hand over tanks and the first to hand over cruise missiles. So it's really played a role punching above its weight, particularly in terms of support for Kiev. The second thing is that this package contains the sort of things that the Ukrainians really do need desperately. 1,600 missiles and air defense systems, 4 million rounds of ammunition. These may not be sort of jet aircraft or tanks, but given the situation on the battlefield at the moment, these air defense systems, this ammunition, if it can be supplied quickly, is really going to be a shot in the arm for the Ukrainians. So don't write off the UK. It plays a very important role because it tends to lead where others follow.
And it's a good point, Jamie, isn't it? Actually what the Prime Minister is announcing, the money is sort of there as the sort of headline, but actually he's announcing the transfer of real weapons in real time. There's a big difference between doing that and perhaps what the Americans have said, which is here's the money. But how quickly is American material likely to get to Ukraine?
Well, it's true that in the past, the supplies from the United States have often not been speedy. There's always, of course, the bureaucracy of getting export licenses and signing off on these type of things. But the other thing is often the Pentagon has had a bit of a debate about whether it should supply Ukraine immediately from existing stocks or whether it should go to defense industry and say, look, we need you to manufacture 100 Abrams tanks for Ukraine, which can take months or even years. But the Pentagon has been waiting a long time, obviously, as you well know, for Congress finally to get its act together and to pass this 61 billion package. So they've had time to at least identify the equipment and the stocks so that they're ready to go as soon as the Senate, hopefully today, follows the House of Representatives and approves this package. It would have been very negligent of them not to do this homework and be ready to go. The second piece of good news for the Ukrainians is it seems that the United States is ready immediately to supply the so-called ATACMS long-range artillery system, which the Ukrainians have been asking for a long time. It has a range of about 160 kilometers, which means that it's ideal for the Ukrainians to strike at the Russian rear echelons to prevent the massing for a major spring offensive, which of course is what everybody has predicted at the moment. So yes, there have been some bottlenecks in the past, but of course the United States is very mindful of the rather difficult, I won't say desperate, but difficult situation that the Ukrainian army is now in, having run out of a lot of ammunition and missiles and air defense. So I assume that they've made their preparations to get these supplies flowing as quickly as possible.
Brilliant. Well, Jamie Shea, thank you for your reflections on Rishi Sunak's imminent announcement of the £500 million in extra support for Ukraine, which he's due to be making in Poland in about an hour's time. That's Jamie Shea, the former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General, joining us there.